Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Weber, and today's guest, you know what, Chris? Let me pause it here real quick. I want to pronounce your name right. Let me guess, is it Musto? Or do you
It's
say
how
Musto?
a lot of people say it. Musto or Musto is fine. Yeah. Musto is fine.
Yeah. Musto?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're paused right now. I should have asked that. That's the last thing I want to do is mispronounce a name. So, all right, here we go. I'm going to just start over. All right. Hang on one second. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Weber, and today's guest is Christopher Musto, a retired assistant special agent in charge with Homeland Security Investigations. Chris, welcome, and thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yep, absolutely. This is going to be a good conversation. You've got an outstanding career and a lot to talk about, so I'm ready to get into this and listen to your stories. But before we do that, if it's all right with you, I'd like to read your bio so listeners kind of have an understanding of who you are and where you're coming from. Will that be okay?
Sounds great.
All right, here we go. Chris retired from the United States Department of Homeland Security Investigations in June 2024 as an Assistant Special Agent in Charge. During his career, Chris also served as the acting Deputy Special Agent in charge of the Newark, New Jersey HSI office. He oversaw investigations and intelligence related to national security, narcotics smuggling, cybercrime, child exploitation, money laundering, financial fraud, and violent crime and gangs. Additionally, Chris oversaw the Public Safety Division, which housed the Violent Gang Task Force, Child Exploitation Group, Human Trafficking Group, Special Response Team, and the Rapid Response Team. Chris served as an intelligence liaison to the New Jersey State Police Regional Operations Intelligence Center and Newark Real-Time Crime Center. He supervised the cyber and financial crimes groups, which included the Cyber Crimes Task Force, Network Intrusion, Brick City Money Laundering Task Force, Computer Forensics Unit, and served as the Public Affairs Liaison and the Congressional Liaison. During his career, Chris was also assigned to HSI headquarters within the National Gang Unit. There he served as a senior HSI liaison and sole Department of Homeland Security representative to the Department of Justice's Joint Task Force Vulcan. In addition, Chris led and coordinated multi-jurisdictional, multi-defendant transnational gang investigations with numerous HSI and other federal, state, and international law enforcement agencies. He served as a transnational criminal gang subject matter expert and represented HSI during briefings to the National Security Council, congressional representatives, and other U.S. and foreign government entities. In September 2001, Chris responded to the World Trade Center Ground Zero in order to work on the Bucket Brigade. There he sifted through rubble piles and was heavily involved in recovery efforts. During his career, Chris also worked as a special agent with the U.S. Department of Commerce, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Office for Law Enforcement in New Jersey. Following a successful investigation into the smuggling of large quantities of fish and lobster from South Africa to the United States, along with the United States Customs Service, Chris was offered a position with the U.S. Customs Service, which eventually became ICE. In 1997, he worked as an inspector with the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Chris began his federal career in law enforcement in 1996 as an intern with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in New Jersey. Whew, that's a lot. You've got some extensive experience and an impressive bio. It's really a privilege to talk to you today.
No, thank you. Privilege. Yep. Oh my, listen, we've all done this stuff together, right? Like we don't do anything alone. And I've been fortunate to be around some great people and some great teams throughout the years.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I can't wait to talk about some of those aspects, during your career. Listeners just heard about your career, where you worked, and the years that you worked in certain agencies and in different capacities. But could you share with us, why was it that you actually got into law enforcement? What motivated you to become a law enforcement officer?
Well, growing up, when I did in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, during the 80s and early 90s, I watched all the cop shows, right? And I read the newspaper, and there were some superstars in the law enforcement realm during that period of time. And there was a guy named Dominic Polifrone who worked the Iceman killer case. And Dominic was a family friend, and I used to read his name in the paper a lot of the cases they were working. There was another local detective at the time who went on to be a chief of detectives. His name was Mike Mordaga. All these guys were like idols, and I watched them, and to me they were like Supermen. And then at home, my stepfather was the General Services Administration Inspector General. He was a special agent for years, and a lot of the cases he worked, we talk about, not in very big detail, but I get an idea of what he was doing, where he's traveling to, what kind of work it was, and the difference between being a patrol officer or a detective with a local police department, and then being a federal agent. And putting all this stuff together and watching the shows and watching the detective shows and the investigators and watching these real live heroes that were investigating all these crimes, I said that's where I wanted to be. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, it sounds like you had an awesome collaboration of inspirations to kind of drive you towards law enforcement.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well, man, as I was preparing for today and reading your bio and our communications, I'm like, this guy has done a lot of stuff in his law enforcement career. And there were so many different things that we could have chose to talk about, but I thought it would be interesting for listeners to hear about a certain segment of your career that maybe not a lot of people are familiar with, law enforcement agency wise, and actual law enforcement focus, which is the Department of Commerce National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Office for Law Enforcement.
It's a mouthful.
It is, but they have some important responsibilities, and in our communications, I thought this is an interesting focus to talk about. So would it be okay if we talk about that segment of your career?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. And then I thought, since you were, you're in the Newark area, and you were in law enforcement at the time this occurred, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, I thought maybe after we talked about NOAA, that we could kind of transition into, like your bio said, you were out there at ground zero on recovery efforts. And I think it's so important, as time has passed, I think people tend to forget about that tragic event, or maybe even people, younger folks, weren't even alive when that happened. And
Yeah.
I really think it's important to talk about that and make sure people are aware of what happened, number one, and number two, make sure that people are aware of people like you that went out there to assist in that terrible attack. So would those two topics of conversation be good with you today?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Outstanding. When you talk about, should I refer to it as NOAA or OLE? What's the best way to go?
You just put Noah. Just say
Noah.
Noah.
All
Yeah.
right. Perfect. I'll say Noah. Um,
The other
like I
side of
said,
that was people call me a fish cop.
the fish police. All right. That's good. All right, the fish police, Noah. So let's talk about that. And correct me if I'm wrong. That's a smaller, when people think of federal law enforcement, they think FBI or DEA or Homeland Security, but oftentimes people aren't aware of a little bit smaller agencies like that, like maybe the U.S. Postal Service, Postal OIG, or Army CID,
Yeah.
or TIGTA, the Treasury. I don't even know what that acronym means, but I know it's like Treasury related, tax
Sure. Yeah.
investigation. So let's talk about NOAA and what it is, what it does, and some of your experiences. So maybe just kind of start us off and tell us what it is and what it focuses on.
Sure. So NOAA is under the U.S. Department of Commerce, and they regulate the commercial fishing industry as well as import and exports of any seafood products. So they're different in from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Fish and Wildlife has all inland water, inland fish species,
Mhm.
and NOAA would handle any marine species. So anything out in the ocean, anything being imported into the United States, and they would handle the imports and exports. So if a company was exporting seafood or marine species out of the U.S. to another country, they would also enforce it. They worked very close with the U.S. Customs Service at that time when I was there, and now with HSI and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection as well. Because they're
Okay.
also looking at containers moving in and out of the ports.
Okay. And that's interesting how it kind of meshes and ties in with the other agencies. Now, how did you first become aware of the existence of this agency? Were
Um,
you working with with U.S. Customs at the time?
No, I so at the time that I applied for the NOAA position, I was actually in the JFK airport as an immigration inspector at the time. So I started in '97 as an immigration inspector and stayed there. I got into our Marine unit in JFK, so I would board ships. I found out about the position through through friends and through other colleagues, and then I got a call from a friend of our family who had known that this position was opening up, and actually he was the special agent in charge at the time of NOAA. His name was Dick Livingston. Great guy. I owe him a lot. He got me in there, and I remember when he hired me saying, basically don't let me down and you'll make us proud. We're going out on a limb to pick you up and pull you out of INS, because the INS job at the time was tough. It was 6 days a week with 1 day off, and you had a rotating weekend like every 7 weeks at JFK
Mm.
Airport. So it was a tough shift schedule, and it was always changing. So I wanted to get something more you know conducive to family life. I had a long-term girlfriend who is now my wife, and yeah, just wanted to make sure that we had a better quality of life going down the road. And I got the job at NOAA, and it was at the time I started, there was purely like a regulatory type agency. We had criminal investigative authority, but at the time the focus was on a lot of regulatory stuff. So if you had overages of fish, monkfish, lobster, some some fish were restricted. You couldn't catch them in different areas. So all these fishermen would try to hide, conceal, pretty much the same as drugs, right? They would
Yeah, that's
fish
what
on.
I was going to ask. I was kind of interject you there and say, it's essentially the same concept as
Yeah.
smuggling narcotics
Yeah.
or money, smuggling money, but you're just using those products, right?
Yep. And what I found by getting there, and I had this thought about being this federal agent that was involved in all these kind of, great investigations and big time complex criminal cases. I moved away from the purely regulatory field and got into the criminal investigations field. And I actually started to get sources of information on the water who now told us about ships that were coming in that had narcotics on them. They were fishing boats, but they were going to be coming in with narcotics and they'd be hidden, in addition to hidden fish. So it was pretty easy to hide fish on a boat. But in New Jersey, we had special state law and state permission, not permission, but authority to look
Hmm.
anywhere a fish can be held on that boat without a warrant. So if we go
Oh,
on, we do a
wow.
boarding on the boat, pretty much anywhere you can think of, you can search. And most ships would have where the captain would be the wheelhouse. These steps would go up, and those steps would be removable. And a lot of times it would hide behind those steps different trays of fish and totes full of fish or lobster, or they
Wow.
would bring them in and try to offload them in the middle of the night, put them in a truck. I mean, listen, the mo or the ways they would do their methods were exactly the same as drug smugglers. Middle of the night, ships go out, they come back in when no one's around. They try to offload and in secluded places, and then
Yeah.
they falsify documents. So they had to be in conspiracy with a dealer or a fish house. So the ship would have to come in and they would have to offload. But now the fish house can't pay for their full illegal load. They can only pay for the legal load, because if you start to look the numbers back and forth, you're going to find it right away. It goes back to
Hmm.
the money and the bookkeeping and the documentation. So the legit load will be paid by check, and then the illegitimate load will be paid cash. And then you just have to watch the bank accounts and do that research and basically trace the money and trace the books.
Wow. Well, let me ask this, and it's kind of for my own interest and curiosity, but I'm confident it will help listeners too. When you're talking about ships and boats that are smuggling these, items, I work narcotics in HSI, so I know like quantities of drugs that are smuggled. Like if you would board a ship and you would look behind these steps and these concealed areas, like what kind of quantities are we talking about on like fish or lobster or stuff like that?
So on a normal coastline vessel, you're probably talking 10,000 pounds, 5,000 pounds,
Oh, wow. I had
up
no
to
clue.
it all depends on the size of the ship that went out, whether it's a large trawler or whether it's a smaller, a specific lobster boat. But each different species would have their own way of manipulating their limits, manipulating where they can go fish. They would, I think by now, at that time, it was a new program, but by now, I think everybody has a GPS vessel monitoring system, so they would try to manipulate that as well. They would put a some kind of a covering over the monitoring system, so you couldn't see where the boat was, so we couldn't track it.
Hmm.
There were days of the week where they were allowed to fish, or days of the year. So maybe they got 80 days a year to go fish for a certain species, and they would have to call in the morning and call in when they came back. Well, maybe they don't want to go and waste all that gas every day, because you don't know if you're going to catch every day. So what they would sometimes do is go fish one day and collect their week's worth of quota in one day. But then they would call back and forth each day to make it look like they called in each day. So that was a violation of the regulations and a violation of law. There were a lot of different ways that they tried to evade it. There was a regulation that came out, and they would try to evade it in some way.
Hmm. Wow. Almost like precursors for drug manufacturing.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So, I mean, you said earlier people joked with you about being the fish police, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah.
You're on customs waters. You're involved with people smuggling, like you said, narcotics as well. And you're gathering and maintaining confidential informants as you do this stuff, and you're boarding vessels. So there's a lot to this job, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it was dangerous too, because normally if you're a regular police officer, agent, detective, and you go into an area where there's guys with knives, you're going to tell them to put the knives down right before you talk to them. That's just normal on a boat. Guys are filleting fish. They have these long, sharp knives that they're cutting through fish really easy. Now, we did take precaution, but there's fish hooks around, there's knives around, there's could be power tools around it. And we did get involved in some of these, discussions or heated arguments, and we would tell people, put those knives down, or we're going to have a problem here. We also had issues where warring families or warring rivals on it was Point Pleasant, New Jersey, and Belmar, New Jersey, but there were rival families that had very, very robust lobster fishing businesses, and one accused the other of robbing their pots out at sea. So a lobster pot was, I think it was about maybe 3 foot by 4 foot, a cube, went down into the water, and they're attached by lines. The lines let out all these pots, and then there's buoys and markers that when the boats come by, you leave them out for a few days. They fill up lobster. You go through, you clean them out, and then you bring your lobsters back to sell. And traditionally, what would happen is, if no one was out there, another family or another group of business would put out their lobster pots, and this rival would come over and empty those pots. And that was a big deal. Well, one, it was illegal. One, it was theft. But it was also in the fishermen, in their world, in their realm, that's worthy of getting your ass kicked or more.
Yeah.
And so these guys, these two families went out, and they wound up having a shooting at sea where
Wow.
The one family shot the one. There were several brothers in one of the family, and there was a father and some of the sons in the other, and they wound up having a shootout at sea. And the one with the shotgun shot the one brother, shot him in the stomach. Guy went down. They had to call the Coast Guard to get him out and airlift him out. But the other one shot back with a Ruger Mini 14, and there was a raincoat hanging up. And from far away, with the boats moving at sea, a little fog, they shot all around the raincoat, thinking that was the guy. And when we got out there, there was bullet holes in the raincoat and the window into the boat. It was crazy. But that's not the end of that story. And NOAA got involved in this because we regulated both of these families of their fishing and what they were doing. Ultimately, the underlying reason for the shooting and the battle was because of the lobster pots and the limits. And so we knew the people, we knew the area, we knew the boats. So we partnered up with the FBI and the local police and the state police, and we investigated the shooting. Well, while that investigation's going on, the brother that got shot later on comes back and firebombs the other family's boat.
Wow.
And
It's
we
almost
tracked him.
mafia-like.
Yeah, pretty much. We called them the Hatfields and the McCoys at the time.
Hey, that's exactly what I was thinking, but I'm like, maybe listeners might not even know who that is, but I was thinking exactly the same.
Yeah. So that we wound up tracing the one who did the firebombing, because he had a blowback, got burnt, and he drove up to Canada to get medical attention, and then came back to New Jersey. And we wound up putting it all together. It was that was done with the state police in New Jersey. The arson, the shooting was done with the FBI, and some people went to jail, and it was a great case. It was a lot of fun. It was different. It was something that NOAA OLE had never done. So it was kind of like groundbreaking for that agency. And we got to, build a good rapport with the other agencies around that didn't know. Like you just said, not a lot of people knew who NOAA was, but after that they did, because we saw our work product and the investigative skills that we had and the ability we had, which was great. And we became a good partner to a lot of people down there in that area.
Yeah, man, that's a great example. And I can see why. Like, I'm putting myself, if I were an FBI agent, or state police, I would want to have a great working relationship with your department because it can do nothing but benefit, my agency as well as yours. So that's a great point. Well, let me ask you about that specific scenario there. When that happens out on the waters like that, and there's a shooting and there's, violations of law, as far as prosecuting that, so say the FBI comes in and they prosecute that federally for whatever crimes. Could you explain how, like, what U.S. Attorney's Office does that go through if it's out on the water like that? Just the same one that you're residing in, or how does that work? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So within 3 miles is state waters, and within 12 miles is federal waters. And then within 250 miles of the coast is the exclusive economic zone of the country. So every country has their own EEZ, or exclusive economic zone. The United States is out to 250 miles. So once you get in that area, it's we have federal jurisdiction within the 12 miles, which is where these events had happened. We're in the District of New Jersey still, so outside of the normal area, but it's the jurisdictional waters of the state of New Jersey and the District of New Jersey. So that case
Okay.
was prosecuted in New Jersey, and I think the closest, I think it was out of Camden. I think that case went out of Camden. The firebombing or the arson was a state police case. We assisted them, but they prosecuted out of the county prosecutor's office
Okay.
in New
There's
Jersey.
a lot of
Yeah,
moving parts.
but anything that comes into our jurisdiction, and there was a funny later on in my career, one of the prosecutor that I used for this a large smuggling case out of South Africa. His name was Marcus Asner, one of the best prosecutors I've ever seen, and a very close friend to this day. Marcus had called me when I got later on in life, when I got over to Customs HSI, and he was prosecuting a case, and he needed to prove that he had jurisdiction. So he actually had me plot something out at like 11:30 at night. It wasn't my case, had no involvement. He just said, "Can you do what you did with your case is, and tell me where this is?" And it was funny. The plane flew over the jurisdictional boundaries, the waterways of the Southern District in New York, but landed at Newark Airport. And the Newark U.S. Attorney's Office didn't want to accept the case. But since that plane went over the jurisdictional waters of the Southern District, he took the case.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. But he
Huh.
wanted to make sure. We pulled the flight plan, and sure enough, that plane went over the Southern District's waters.
Wow. Wow. Well, let me ask you this. As you're talking about, your cases and your experiences there, I'm thinking to myself, I'm an outdoors kind of person. I like hiking, I like fishing, I like camping, that type of stuff. It seems like a job that, if you're into that type of stuff, it might be even more fun. In addition to the crimes you're investigating and the work that you're doing, you're out in the open air, you're out on the waters, you're doing stuff. My question is, are you an outdoors kind of guy?
Yeah, I'm a big fisherman. I like fishing. I like hunting. I like being outside, whether
So
it's
that
hiking
definitely
around or on the beach.
that definitely had to help.
Yeah.
That's like a bonus. So I was
In,
just kind
in
of putting myself in your shoes there.
in my group and where we worked, I was probably the only one that had like a criminal justice degree. Everybody else had some type of environmental biology, or some other type of degree towards natural resources.
Sure, sure. Huh. Yeah, they were the brainiacs.
Yeah.
Right. Right. All right. Well, people ask me this a lot um, about my career. So I'm going to ask you, and I think I know the answer, but pertaining to this aspect of your career, Noah, was there a typical day for you, or did it just vary from, like case to case or day to day?
Yeah, it kind of varied from day to day. We would get out quite a bit. Um, we were able to we worked very closely with our state Department of Environmental Protection and their state fish and game officers. Uh, some days we'd go to the Fulton Fish Market. Heard of that? It was Years ago, it was kind of like the Wild West. It was run by mafia. It was run by certain people in the traditional families. Everybody had to know somebody to get a job, but all the fish was out there, and all the fish that was caught, whether it was legal or illegal, would mostly come in through that market, and it was bustling in the morning. So it would start getting going at 2, 3 in the morning, and it would be closed by 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, or closing down. Getting a lot less busy because people are coming in to get their fish they need for their restaurants and their stores, and they needed to get there early in the morning, the freshest fish, and then bring it to the stores or bring it to the restaurants. And so that was always a good thing when we would go over there. It's always a little bit different, but that's what every day was a little bit different at NOAA, because you wouldn't know if you were going to go board a boat, you were going to go to a seafood market, we're going to be doing paperwork, or handling something in the middle of the night where the Coast Guard would call. And so Coast Guard would do their own enforcement, but we were the investigative end of that. So if they stopped the vessel that had illegal fish or fish products on the boat, they'd call us to carry on the investigation. So we would have to meet them wherever it was. The state Fish and Game, same thing. If they had a larger investigation, similar to a state with narcotics, if you got a small load and it's something that they can fix, no problem. They deal with it, they process it, and on they go. If it's larger and they want to expand it and they want to move to different directions, they would call us in NOAA, and then we would take it and run with the investigation. So it was definitely different. And I think that's what I liked about it the most. Travel. We were a small agency. There was 130 agents at the time across the country. So a majority of what we wanted to do, if we wanted to do an interview in California, we got on a plane to California and we did the interview. During my case in South Africa, there were several interviews we had to do in the United States. We sent people out all over, but it was basically our crew because there were so few agents around the country. Most of them were done by myself, my partner, or a couple of people in our office.
Huh. That's pretty fascinating. Let me ask you this. As far as, the variety there, um, what did you personally prefer? What aspect of the job did you prefer the most? Like, does that make sense? Like, what
Yep.
did you like to do most in that job?
So I was not a big fan of these de minimis regulatory inspections that we had to do. We were forced to do certain things, and to me, these guys were working hard. The fishermen, they were busting their ass, right? It's a hard job. It's probably one of the hardest jobs. It's not something I ever want to do.
No.
So doing regulatory inspections and bothering guys for one fish, two fish, that really never really appealed to me. And so um, I battle a little bit with my supervisor, who is now Scott Doyle, who's a very good friend of mine. Scotty was a great guy, but he was only, kind of pushing forward the agency line of what we had to do. But every time I could, I'd move away and just looked at the real egregious violations and the real criminal violations. And that's why eventually, I moved that agency, forcefully kind of pushed it in that direction. And that's where they're at now, doing good, complex, legitimate criminal investigations from
Okay.
almost all the regulatory functions they push to the state.
Okay. And this might not be a fair question, and you might not know, but it just kind of struck me. And I know you left there and moved on and had a great career with Homeland Security. But do you have any idea of manpower in today's world that this agency might have? I know you said you had small numbers back then. That might be a tough question to answer.
Yeah, I do keep in contact with some. I think they're smaller than we were then, and they have
Oh,
more uniform officers now than they had agents then.
okay.
So at that
Okay.
time when I was there, we had more agents and less uniform NOAA officers. I think now it's changed a little bit.
Okay. And I think you mentioned mafia when you were talking there, and it struck me as did they put their hands into this industry as well as a money making effort for the mob or
So
anything
there
along
were
those lines?
there were organized crime influences in the Fulton fish market. It was there because that's where There was one guy that had ice. There was one guy that did, the boxes. I mean, there was different industries there. The carting was the one group, and then it was always explained to us. And there was an agency in New York called the Department of Investigation, and we worked with them quite a bit collaboratively because they needed information on how things were moving, prices, and where the I guess where the money was being built into different resources or businesses. So whether it was carting, the price was supposed to be X, but it was padded a little bit. Any of those different anomalies that we find, we would have to investigate, and we help them to investigate. So we would have the actual documentation from the fish side, and then we would be able to put it together with what the DOI had, and then we would try to find who was involved in that. We never did any, well, NOAA never did any organized crime cases there, but we were well aware of the vibe there and the people that were in charge or overseeing things. And it was more Italian organized crime than anybody else that was down there. And I think since DOI came in and they moved the market from where it was, I think they cracked a lot of that and they moved a lot of it out. But still, there's some, different types of businesses like trucking and ice and other businesses that are influenced by organized crime in that area.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Well, how about you had a fairly interesting case, the South African case, right?
Yeah.
Could you walk us through that? Maybe share more details about that?
Sure. So just for background, I get married in May of 2001. And in early June of 2001, just for kind of reference, we get an email through an International Fisheries Council meeting. One of our administrators in NOAA gets an email from South African administrator saying, "Hey, can you help us? Essentially, can you help us with this case? We just found that this company, Hout Bay Fishing Industries in South Africa, is moving large amounts of illegal fish to the United States." So Michelle Curick was our administrator's name, and she forwarded that email to our office. So I literally get back from honeymoon, and I get handed this lead. "Hey, take a look at this. I don't know if there's anything there, but just see what you can do with it." And my boss, Scott Doyle, he says, I know you just got back, you just get back into things, but here, take this and we'll take a look at it. So I start to look into it, and I realize this thing's got teeth. And now there's a ship on the high seas on the way over from South Africa to the United States called the Libivia. The Libivia is filled with what we suspect is all this illegal fish. Now, at the time, we were investigating under the thought that there was Patagonian toothfish in the entire container. This would have been like 20,000 pounds of Patagonian toothfish, or you probably know Chilean sea bass. Mm-hmm. And at the time, and I think still, it's highly regulated. And there's a specific permit document that lists and should coincide with exactly how much fish is in that container of Patagonian toothfish or Chilean sea bass. So if that permit says 5,000, there shouldn't be more than 5,000 pounds in the container. If the permit says 10, you get the picture.
Okay.
Well, there's 20,000 pounds coming over. And the documentation that we have doesn't say 20,000 pounds. So we decided to go to customs, and I call a guy that we knew was friendly with our office, and another guy that we built up a really good rapport with over the years. His name was Tom Hayes. He was a U.S. Customs agent. He was an undercover guy for years, and he's a huge smuggling guy. He's a truck driver. He's got a CDL, and he does all these big-time narcotics investigations. I said, "Well, Tommy, can you help me out? I got this thing going on. I need some help getting customs, open up the box." He says, "Sure." He says, "But on one condition." I said, "Yeah." So now it's the summer. He lives down at the shore area. It's an hour to the Newark office. He goes, "I got to work out of your office down the shore for a while." I said, "No problem." Well, we open up the container, and we find that there's rock lobster, and then there's Patagonian toothfish. So the rock lobster is now illegal as well, because when it left South Africa, they didn't have permission to send that out. And all this Chilean sea bass does not have the proper permits to come in. So we seized the container. Oh, I'm sorry, we detained the container. We couldn't formally seize it until we got authority from the U.S. Attorney's Office. So we went to the Newark U.S. Attorney's Office. And I'm sure you've dealt with U.S. Attorney's offices in the past. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. Well, for 30 days, we argued over this container. We didn't seize it. And they eventually, at the end of that 30 days, say to us, you got to turn it around. I think it was like the 26th or 27th day. So we only have 30 days to hold it or release it or turn it back around. I want to seize it in the worst way. The Newark U.S. Attorney's Office drops the case. They decline. And the South African government calls the U.S. government at higher levels than us and says, if you don't seize this container, we're going to the floor of the United Nations today. We're going to demand you seize the container. But at that point, the Southern District of New York gets involved, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Southern District accepts it and tells us to seize it immediately. So we seize it. We go through all of it. We document every box that was in there, and it was all illegal fish. And we now, and as this is all going on, we spent every day of those 30 days in Newark. So my buddy Tommy never got to come to my office by the beach, and I had to drive back and forth to Newark every day. So that was a funny part of that story, but
Yeah,
it wound up
definitely
working out well. We then brought the South African officials here to Newark, and they brought over the documentation of the last, I think we had over 20 containers that we suspected of having illegal fish in it. And at all told, it was $56 million worth of fish product in those containers. And
that's
when
astronomical.
when we started to match the numbers, and again, it was all tracing documents, pulling documents, putting everything together, tracing the money, and then matching up the export documentation from South Africa. Then they had a company in the middle called Black Eagle Shipping, where they would turn that illegal fish from South Africa and all those illegal documents into the legitimate document. It's basically a shell company. It didn't exist. It only existed in somebody's computer in the New York office of Ice Brand Seafoods, where Arnold Benjes, who was the main guy that was involved, he was the owner of both companies. His office would generate this document and then add it to the customs documentation in the U.S. So in customs in the U.S., if we just opened the container and looked at it, it looks like legitimate product. They're not lying to U.S. customs, because if they did that, then the containers would be seized all the time. Yeah. But they lied in South Africa and falsified documentation leaving South Africa, which made it a violation of the United States' Lacey Act. The Lacey Act makes anything in another country illegal in this country.
Okay.
So the exportation of that and the falsification of the documents in South Africa gave rise to the law, the Lacey Act violation here in the United States.
All right, that makes sense. Let me ask this, so listeners kind of have an understanding of how it works. This container, this original container that comes over that you wanted to seize and have the difficulties with, there's an extensive time delay in being able to seize it. So it's detained, like you said. It's full of this food. How does that, is it, just so people kind of understand, are these, environment controlled containers? Is there an expiration date that they have to be delivered? How does that work?
Yeah. So everything in the container was frozen, and it was a refrigerated container. So we had to actually hook it up, and the government was supposed to be on the hook for the dime. I think if I remember correctly, is like $23,000 for the demurrage costs of keeping it plugged in and keeping that freezer container going and keeping it all flash frozen. Everything in there was frozen, so it could have kept for quite a while. If we would have taken the plug out or let it stop, then we would have a big problem on our hands. The other part of that is when it's packed in South Africa, there were dirty or corrupt officials that were on the South African side that looked the other way or signed off for bribes. Arnold Benjes bribed, I think, 14 of 16 inspectors that were there. So they would allow that to go through with the falsified documents. They knew what was in there, but they were getting, I think, $1,000 a month to push it through. Now, I think they only made about 20,000 a year. So $1,000 a month to push that through was significant for the inspectors and the government officials that were in South Africa. But that container comes over. Now it's on a ship for 2 weeks, about 2 weeks before it enters the United States waters. And then it arrives in Newark. And you got to wait for that container to actually be taken off. There's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of containers on the ship. You got to wait for that one to come off. We have to watch it as it comes off, make sure nothing happened to it, keep continuity of that evidence or that container. Then we had it brought to a location where we could open it up privately so nobody would see what was in there. We didn't break the lock on it or the serial number ID, and we wanted to keep it intact so we could let it go through. This one didn't. We wound up not being able to let it go through. We were going to do a pass through and let it go to where ultimately it was going to head to, but it took too long to go through that process. So we wound up just opening it up and then documenting everything that was inside the container. But it was frozen, and when we had to open it and take it apart and do all that work, it was in a freezer warehouse. So we froze our ass off that day going through, and I had to buy a lot of food and drinks for my team. They did a great job, while we were out there. But it was a long, cold day.
Wow. This episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast is sponsored by Graphic Options. When it comes to custom screen printing, embroidery, and promotional gear, Brenda and her team are the real deal. I trust them with everything, whether it's a hat for my consulting business, a shirt for my podcast, or a large order of both. They've never let me down. They don't treat you like just another order. They listen, they care, and they make sure you walk away with something you're proud to put your name on. You have the right to great service and quality, and that's exactly what you'll get at Graphic Options. Visit graphicoptionsonline.com. That's graphicoptionsonline.com. And let them know the Right to Remain Silent podcast sent you. Well, how about this question? I know when we seize counterfeit merchandise, large quantities of that stuff, we seize it and ultimately it's disposed of or destroyed. In a scenario like this where you have food products, what happens at the conclusion with this food?
So in NOAA's policies and their regulations and their laws and the statutes, we sell the product. We actually put it out for bid, and you get 3 bids, and usually go with the highest bid. Mm-hmm. And then they take over. So once we were able to bring it to that freezer warehouse, we were able to break out the Chilean sea bass from the rock lobster, whatever other products were in there. They would be held there, and NOAA would pay to hold that product in that freezer warehouse. Now, most of these large seafood companies or distributors also have places inside the freezer warehouses. So when we would do the bidding, and at that point, this was something new for NOAA as well. I kind of created a policy and created the way forward of getting this done, because it was such a large amount. And at the time, rock lobster is monopolized by this company, Ice Brand Seafoods. There's only 2 companies in the United States at the time. It was Alba Foods and Ice Brand Seafoods that sold South African rock lobster in the United States, and it was roughly $21 a pound, anywhere from $16 to $21 a pound. So they had a monopoly. They monopolized that entire industry. So there was only a few companies that could purchase it. And the other problem that I had was that Alba at one point was in business with Benjes. So I couldn't let them buy it because I didn't know if the guy Benjes was going to be buying it back to resell it. So I had to go out and get 3 bids from 3 companies that weren't associated. And I had to look into those companies to make sure that they weren't associated in any way with the company that I was investigating. We wound up selling it off. And then in that freezer warehouse, it gets turned over. So let's just say this is Chris Musto's section. and then this is Alba seafood section. We just move it over, and they would
Okay.
send the government a check, and then we would put the check in a lockbox, and we'd argue in court over that check. We've documented all the fish. We kept a representative sample of what was there for court purposes if we needed it. But and then we had all the pictures and all the boxes all documented through a memorialization of like an Excel spreadsheet of everything we had in there. So
Okay.
and then we argue over the check. I think the first check was like 450,000 or 500,000. So
Does
it was
is it
significant.
is it attorneys with NOAA, or is it like the U.S. attorney that does this negotiation or arguing?
So for the sale was the NOAA attorneys.
Okay.
They would handle the sale for the lockbox. When it went for forfeiture, that was all part of the criminal case later on, and the
Okay.
criminal asset forfeiture.
All right, that makes sense. Well, how does this conclude? Do you have a general, like a general summary of maybe charges and
Yeah.
defendants, or how does that result?
So we ultimately had 5 total defendants. They were all from South Africa, and what wound up. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in this case. Like one of the interviews I did was in a blackout in an NYPD precinct. During a blackout in August of 2003, we took somebody in there, and the power went out, and it was kind of one of the craziest things ever. We're doing an interview and there's no
Did
power.
that did that help
By my
motivate the
flashlight.
individual?
Is what?
Motivate the individual to
Yeah,
talk?
yeah.
Wow,
So
okay.
we look. The investigation took quite a while, and in the middle of that investigation, right as soon as we ended that container saga of the 30 days in the summer, 9/11 happens. So
Hmm.
for 6 months, the U.S. attorney that we're working with, our whole team, all get tasked with other things. The U.S. attorney's out doing terrorism search warrants and cases and trying to find people. He's in the Southern District in New York, which is ground zero, literally ground zero for everything that happens. He's doing work on that end. We're doing not only the work at ground zero, but we're also doing investigative work. We fly in agents from all over the country to come in and help with the investigation, track down leads. We joined the JTTF. Some of our guys went to be air marshals at that time. So we lost about 6-7 months during that period of time. And that's when I realized, there was a larger calling than just Noah's work, right? We were just attacked. Customs is handling cases that regarding weapon smuggling and narcotic smuggling, that the money and the IPR violations are funding terrorism. So I decided at that point, I want to move on and I want to do something else, but I'm going to complete this case. And once we come back to work, 6-7 months later, we get back into it. It takes a little bit to get back in, still, closing up loose ends from the JTTF time. And then we get involved in pulling all this data together, going through all the money. I had a subpoena accounts, and we do mutual legal assistance treaties, MLATs, to get information from South Africa, information from some offshore bank accounts. So this guy and the family had trusts and bank accounts in Gibraltar, the Jersey Islands, and Switzerland. So they're all tax havens. They're all places that are really difficult to get information from. But we were able to get some information with the help of the U.S. Customs at the time. And then I traveled over to South Africa. Some of the guys on the team traveled over. Their team came here a couple of times. And then in August of 2003, we arrested all the Arnold Benjes, David Benjes, his son, Sean Levy, Grant Berman, and Jeffrey Knoll. The 5 of them were arrested. In addition to all the charges that we had with the Lacey Act, we had also, once we arrested them, we're going to indict them. If they didn't cooperate and they didn't come in and plead, we were going to indict them on money laundering charges and trafficking charges. We had proven that the company from Hout Bay Fishing Industries, a South African company, had brought women over to work in their Portland, Maine facility at like no pay. I think they were getting $4 an hour or less. They were holding them against their will. They were treating them really, really poorly. But we wound up seizing all those businesses. And one part that really made this case is during that period of time when we came back from 9/11 and we're back to work, I got this idea to go grab garbage out of their New York office. And so they had this big high-rise office building in center of Manhattan. And we went up, we started stealing their garbage. So every night we would go up, and the cleaning crew would come out and leave the garbage on the front of the door, and they would pick it up and then go walk down the hall and drop it in the chute. Well, I had either myself, or Jimmy Casson, one of our agents, would pick the garbage up. He was the newest agent. Pick the garbage up, bring it back to us. We'd go through it, and I found the money transfers to the offshore bank accounts. I found how they were paying from New York for the fisherman that was fishing for the illegal rock lobster and toothfish. And then we found where they were paying the bank accounts, they were paying the dirty inspectors or the corrupt inspectors in South Africa. So we pulled all that data together. And then one day we got there and everything was shredded. And in the bottom it said, why are they taking the garbage? What are they looking for? Well, this was after 30 days we got found. So, you know, we did good. We
well,
did
that was a
good
gold mine of information there initially.
But we were able to, and that was used later on the court proceeding. Judge Kaplan had mentioned that later on in the sentencing. But through all that, we obtained a ton of information that really kind of solidified the case, gave us enough to get search warrants for all the places that they had. Ice Brand Seafoods was in New York, Portland, Maine, and then Hout Bay Fishing, it was in South Africa. The South African group called the Scorpions, or the Directorate of Special Operations, they did the investigation on the South African side. And we combined together, we collaborated, and it was a great partnership. And one of my good friends from South Africa, JD Kotza, and if you search his name or you go on the web, he was after this case, he was a big time narcotics guy, gun guy, violent crime guy. But after this case, became a South African superstar in natural resources and natural resource environmental protection. And he just passed away in the last year. So we miss him, but he was a great dude, great guy. Had him over at my house.
Like it.
Yeah, we had fun.
Well, how long from start to finish approximately was this investigation?
This was about 2 years.
Okay.
It was 2 years with that a little over 2 years with that 6-7 month hiatus for 9/11.
And then 5 defendants out of that.
Yeah. We seized we got 11.5 million. And then later on down the line, from the beginning, South Africa wanted to get their resources were decimated. So their entire fishing industry, their South African rock lobster, South Coast and West Coast rock lobster were decimated because of all this overfishing. And Benjis would say, I have rubber band permits or rubber band quotas, because he would just keep using the same permit application over and over and over again. He also said, and if you don't mind, I want to read what the judge said at his sentencing.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
So Judge Kaplan is the U.S. District Court judge who presided over the case, and he said at his sentencing, I view his behavior, meaning Arnold Benjis, as evidencing an astonishing display of arrogance, of wealth, and power. For example, I have before me, and it has not been contradicted, that when asked by his associates about the possibility of being caught in this scheme, Mr. Benjis responded that he was unlikely to be prosecuted because he was suggested obstruction, that he has, and I quote, fuck you money. And the judge went on, evidence suggesting obstruction of justice by Mr. Benjis, withholding documents from the grand jury, use of a shredder to destroy documents, and the engagement of a private investigator to shadow U.S. government law enforcement personnel who were carrying out this investigation. That was me. They paid $47,000 to follow me around.
Wow.
And my wife called one day and said, hey, there's a car parked across the street and they just keep looking at the house. So I came home right away. I pulled the guy out and we had a conversation. And then
I would assume that was a little unnerving.
Yeah. We had a little chit chat.
Yeah.
Didn't go well for him. And then we called his boss with the U.S. attorney on the line, and Marcus Asner basically read them the riot act and told them in no uncertain terms, I'll lock you up too.
Wow. Wow. Man, that's interesting. How about like, can you recall what type of sentences these five individuals
Yeah,
received?
Arnold and David got the most. I think Arnold got like 50 some odd months in prison,
Hmm.
and David got like 30. And then um, some of the other ones had a little cooperation here and there, proffers, and they got less. They all got fined. And then ultimately, South Africa was able to recoup $52 million from them in a restitution claim. And they part of the money laundering or the money investigation that I did was able to find the trust that he had offshore in South Africa, was able to go and get that money, put liens on all that money and get it back. And yeah, so we got $11.5 million check to the U.S. government, which 3 million I think went to customs, and that's part of how I made my way to U.S. Customs. Um, Not that I bought my way in, but that was pretty
Right.
good.
Right. That helped.
It helped. But yeah, most of
Yeah, that
them kind of got probation, and then he got the 50 months.
yeah, I mean collectively that's a substantial uh and very effective investigation.
Yeah,
Great relationships with international law enforcement, significant financial seizures. You're putting people in prison for violating these laws. So, great job on that. And,
nice.
and that's a great investigation.
Yeah, it was a great. Again, that was like an all-star team. We had my partner at the time was Jeff Ray, Logan Gregory, Jim Casson, and then our boss Scott Doyle and Marcus Asner. Which we couldn't have done it without him. He was phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then the South African guys as well.
for sure. Well, and a little bit earlier you mentioned, when 9/11 occurred while you're working this case and things are going on. Would this be an appropriate time to maybe transition to talking about that?
Sure.
How about, yeah, like, I'm going to open the floor to you and just, you know, tell us where you were or how you
Yeah.
found out or just how it unfolded and then how you were involved.
So on that morning, I was across the river. We got another call that we had to go respond to, and it was doing a surveillance. I was in the back of a surveillance van in near Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and just directly across the river across the waterway from Manhattan and from the Trade Center. And on the way out of there, I could see smoke billowing out of the top, and listening to Howard Stern on the radio. And kind of at first, it was joking about what the pilot might have been drunk or something to that effect. And then I start to hear calls on the radio. We have a state police emergency network that goes throughout the whole state of New Jersey, and I heard the Port Authority Police Department calling for any available officer to respond to the Trade Center from anywhere. I mean, they were frantic. You could hear in their voice that there was an emergency. And then obviously I got the radio on, I got TV on. We pull out of that area and we hear the second plane hit. NOAA's not, or at that point was not, a terrorism type agency, or largely criminal type investigative agency. We did criminal investigations, but we weren't first responders in any way. So we had a call and I asked for permission immediately to go over there because, we needed to get there. We needed to help people. We needed to try to save whoever we could. Obviously, we know now that there wasn't much, unfortunately, to save, but at the time there were still evacuations happening. Well, finally got permission early the next morning, and we left at probably like 7:30 from South Jersey, and about an hour ride, 45 minutes to an hour to get to New York. We couldn't get into the city. It's all blocked off. It's all shut down. So we went to Liberty State Park, and we parked there, and we took boats over into Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. And what struck me, and as I said before, I said, in the waterway, floating or file cabinets or pieces of furniture, papers, dust, just the layer of dust and cement dust that was all over everything was just unimaginable. And then walking off the boat and on into Lower Manhattan and walking up towards where I remember so many times walking through and seeing these huge buildings is now everything's blown out. Windows are blown out completely all over. And we went to like a command center and we said, wait, where could we help? And they just pointed at the pile. And there was long lines of people handling, it was bucket brigade. They had buckets, literally just pulling bucket by bucket out. And every once in a while, I'd stop and try to listen because maybe they heard something or they heard a voice or they heard something moving. And I mean, the way that 100 or more people in a line would just stop and be silent just to hear, it was eerie how quick they could do it and how fast. And then unfortunately didn't hear anything. We went on, but we kept working through the night. I think we left about 12, 13 hours later. I never told my wife or at the time my mother that I was going there. So I was young and everybody's worried, why the hell are you there? What are you doing? And then I ran into my stepfather. My stepfather was an agent, and he was a big part of why, I wanted to get involved. And that's, to this day, it was the only case or only thing that we ever worked on together in the federal government. But we were there side by side with his team and our team, and we were all there, pulling stuff out. And every once in a while, there were voids. There were huge voids, and you'd go in and you get stuck, and now you're looking around, and you're like, oh shit, I got no way out of here if this thing collapses. So I'd go back to the back of the line, and that's pretty much how everybody would do it. And a few people would stay inside, and then they'd come out a few minutes later. But we were there for probably 6-7 days. And then they asked if we would go over to the Fresh Kills landfill, where the final sifting of body parts was, or personal effects. And that was tough. All the big bulk, like metal and refuse from the trade center would come there and be dropped in small piles. And in those small piles were feet and arms and legs and just other body parts that were, sometimes hands, and you'd have to collect them and bring them to be documented evidence and put away and secured so that some family could get some closure. Or if there was any kind of personal jewelry, they would take it and get it back to the family. DNA testing, I mean, all that stuff was going on. And it was at the table where we bring it in, it was FBI, NYPD, and I think the state police. And they had these morgue trucks. It was just a surreal scene. I mean, something that I'll never forget. The smells, the burning, the flesh. It was rough. It was a rough time. And you had Pete Forselli on. He talks about the PTSD, and I probably had that. Looking up at the sky at planes for weeks and months and years on end. Making sure that nothing else was going to happen, or the yelling in the middle of the night. My wife would tell me, but yeah, it was a crazy time.
Yeah.
Some positive out of that. Again, made more very good collaborations and connections with people, networking down there, talking to different agencies. And we were there the day that the president spoke. He was on the opposite pile. He was on the opposite side of the pile that I was on. So we were on one side, he was on the other. F-16s and F-14s flying around, and he's speaking, and we can hear him, and it was awesome. I mean,
wow.
Really, that was quite amazing. The other thing that was amazing during that time is how everybody came together and unified. Didn't matter what side of the aisle you were. Didn't matter, color your skin or who you were. Everybody was together. Sports stars were coming down and helping to pull stuff out of piles. You'd go to Home Depot, and we were going to go get masks in Home Depot, and people paid for it. Or they came running over and donating clothes to go let us bring back to the pile, bring back to the firemen. Firemen from all over the place. So when the dust on one of the windows, each fire department or agency that was there would put in basically like a roll call of who they were, where they were from. And then once we got done with Fresh Kills, if you actually, I'm going to show you this picture real quick.
Yeah, I wish you would, please.
So on the 12th, the buildings all around got hit really hard, but they didn't come down. and then they set up these sensors. I mean, they're kind of laser sensors. And anytime the building would move at all, there was a huge whistle that would go off, and everybody would run away from the pile that they were working on and get out of the way until it was safe and clear to go back in. And then you go back in and continue working. During this one period of time, I had this camera that was in my pocket, and I had used it just the day before to take pictures of a whale for Noah. But this particular day, I got into this broken out window, and I think it was an American Express building overlooking a pile, and I was able to snap this shot. If you can make it out. So there's a flag in the middle attached to a fire engine. There's hundreds of guys, NYPD agents, FDNY, and it's just still smoking. The rubble's still smoking. You can't make it out.
In the background.
Yeah.
Yep. The
All
haze
metal.
or the fog.
Yep. So I was able to snap that photo, and then later on, the Department of Commerce used that in a gold medal award, or it was used in giving out to people that got the gold medal award. They made that photo as well. So the secretary at the time gave us an award for going down there, but then they also made this matted photo for everybody to take back with them as well. And anybody that served down there got that through NOAA or the Department of Commerce.
That's a great gesture. And I just, that every time I talk to somebody that has been there, it just saddens me so much that you had to go through that and endure that. And first of all, that it even happened here.
Yeah.
But I personally would like to thank you for everything you did there to respond to that. And, ultimately, I think you said it earlier, like we can, take some triumph out of that tragedy. One of the things, that you mentioned is the overall collective effort of everybody, not just law enforcement. But it kind of strikes, it hits home, makes you kind of proud to be an American, when hearing stories like yours. So I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, it was what we had to do at the time, and I'd do it again in an instant, and we all did. And I just felt so bad that so many people were lost then. And yeah,
right.
It's rough.
Is it fair to ask a couple follow-up questions about your experience there? If not, no offense taken.
Yeah.
While you were there on the bucket brigade, was it silent? Was there background noise? Can you kind of describe the setting of what you heard? You kind of described the smoke and the burning, and just again, kind of give us, I think it's important that people know what you were in.
Yeah. So first, getting into the area was, I mean, the security was outrageous. So we had whether M16s or M4s pointing at us. We were federal agents. We just identified ourselves. After that first day, we drove in. We were able to figure out how to get in. We knew where the checkpoints were. We got through the checkpoints. We went down there. But right before we get to the pile, they were military, and I think they were Army National Guard but they were definitely military. They would search our car. So they would have the guns pointed at us while they searched the car, made sure the car was clean. K9 went around it. We'd park the car. We'd go to work on the line. We'd find out where to go and which line to work at. And it wasn't quiet. I mean, people were talking. We were talking as you pull the buckets back. And then there was sounds of machinery, like whether it's iron workers trying to cut through metal or excavators trying to move things around. There was also a period of time where we saw these destroyed cars, whether it was a citizen's car, NYPD car, fire engine, that were just completely crushed, getting put into like one area. So they would get picked up by a forklift and thrown into an area. And there was probably a city block of cars just on top of each other that they didn't have anywhere else to do with it, because they needed to get machinery and equipment in to move this pile to try to find any survivors, if there were any. They just started taking the city block over and throwing all these damaged cars and crushed cars. There was a car that was turned over. I remember the first day we got there, and the cherry light was still going in the car. It was still plugged in. Um, but it was loud. I mean, the smoke was still coming off. Everything was hot. I went to touch a steel beam, and the fireman like punched me. And I was like, "What's the matter?" He goes, "If you touch that, you're going to lose your hands." And he touched the beam, and then touched my hands with the gloves, and I was like, "Holy shit, yeah!"
Oh
You know,
man.
that would have been really bad.
Yeah.
So there's things that
Wow.
like I just didn't know. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to sit there trying to lift through things,
Yeah,
and
you don't go through training for that.
yeah, it's and then one of those times, and I've told this story, and there's a guy named Steve Nemi. He was one of our agents from Maryland. That whistle went off, and we went running, and he dropped his radio as we were running, but we were running so fast it didn't matter. We wound up finding it later, but he tripped and he fell. And as he almost hit the ground, he was almost flat to the ground, and a fireman came behind him as he was running by his belt loop, picked him up with one hand, put him back on his feet, and kept running. I don't even know the guy's name, but it was one of the
Wow.
most amazing things I've ever seen.
Wow. Well, you
He's a
know
grown
what?
man. Steve's a grown
Yeah.
man. He's,
That
running full
that
steam. And that
that's like
fireman,
heroic.
yeah, with one arm, picked him up and put him right back on his feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, let me ask about this. Through my work, I got to travel to New York frequently, and immediately after that occurred, I was out there and was able to get fairly close and see that devastation. And just being from the Midwest, it's just different than the East Coast and the West Coast, and different living environments. And coming from the Midwest and going out there to that large city and seeing that destruction was so, the way I felt was like overwhelmed. Like I wasn't even a resident of that part of the country, but it was just so overwhelming is the only feeling I can describe. And then the reason I mention that is because once that the 9/11 Memorial and Museum were created, fast forwarding to when that was created and opened, I jumped at the first opportunity to view that, to tour that. And when I did, it was incredibly emotional. And the one thing that struck me, and this is why I kind of asked you about how it sounded while you were out there on recovery efforts, is what struck me as I walked through that memorial and museum was the silence in there. Like there were tons of people. It was almost shoulder to shoulder as we shuffled through there, but it was almost complete silence in there. And I think it was such an experience, is a memorable experience for me. And again, made me realize the depth of the destruction out there. And I just, I'll say it, if I say it once, I'll say it 100 times. I just think it's important for Americans to remember that incident. And I would encourage, the reason I'm saying this is I would encourage people, if you're in New York, to tour that memorial, the 9/11 Memorial Museum. And then that's number one. And number two, I would ask, have you had the opportunity to tour that? And if so, what are your thoughts of it?
Yeah, it took me a long time to go there. I've been there a couple of times now. The first time, well, each time it was very emotional, and I'm not ashamed to say that I was crying through a lot of it, just by things that I remember seeing, and hearing the voices of people saying goodbye to their families on some of those phones, and knowing that watching what had happened, and knowing the aftermath, and knowing how much loss there was for the families. I mean, it was hard to go there. And then the second time I went, it was part of a leadership program we had at HSI in Newark. And one of the trips that was taken for our leadership of newer agents, newer employees, some of these people were kids when this happened, so they didn't even know about some of it. So as
Right.
we walked around, they would look at us and ask questions, which was kind of a little strange. It's like something my kid would do, but now we have agents and new employees that are looking up and asking, "Were you here? Did you do this, or do you remember this or that?" And customs at that time in New York lost a lot of evidence, lost a lot of weapons, lost everything. The all the seizures and all the evidence and their gun vault was in one of those buildings that was destroyed. So they had to actually go in there and get a lot of that equipment out, whatever they could. but some of it is actually in the memorial. It's in the museum. But walking through
Yeah.
that museum and just remember, it was very quiet, like you said, different from what we did there.
Right.
But it is somber. You walk through and there could be people from any number of different countries and no one's talking. And you just don't feel the need to. You don't want to. You're trying to hold back your emotions from seeing different things. Yeah, yeah, it was
Right.
rough. But I wish,
Right.
it's tough, and we're in a really polarized world. But I wish we could go back to 9/12 because there was a unity in the country. Everybody was on the same team, and everybody was fighting for the same things, and we wanted to stop bad things from happening. And
Right.
20, 24 years later, we're
Here
um,
we are.
yeah,
Yeah.
you
I,
got to ask yourself, did we learn anything, or are we going to have a similar issue?
right. Well,
But
I think it's a great point or a great, yeah, great point to kind of transition on, you know, from the discussion of that, the statement that you made about being September 12th, and everybody working together. Maybe somehow, some way, at some point we can get back to that. So that's a great way to look at that, at the overall perspective there. So unless you had something else to mention
no,
or discuss about that, I think that'd be a great
we're good.
uh, point to transition on.
Sure.
All right. Well, is there anything that we talked about, Noah wise, that we should circle back on or touch on? I can't think of anything. I think you did a great narrative explanation of how it went, but in your mind, is there anything you think we need to revisit?
No, I just think that they were very, they were a small agency, but they were pretty powerful, and they do some great work.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And thank you for your perspective of your experiences at 9/11. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. Let me move on to this. You had what sounds like a fantastic career in federal law enforcement. Speak to like younger people out there, maybe younger listeners that are thinking about getting into federal law enforcement, specifically as a veteran federal law enforcement agent. Would you have any suggestions or advice for somebody that has an interest in federal law enforcement?
Yeah, and I did some recruiting and tried to do some recruiting when I was at HSI, but I would say, you know, if you're looking to go to college, don't take a criminal justice track. Learn a skill, whether it's being an accountant, learning business, learning data science. All those skills are transferable to being an agent, and you actually just limit yourself. We can teach you how to be an agent. We can teach you how to do criminal investigations. We can teach you how to be law enforcement. What we can't teach is a special skill that we need people to have when they come in into the government, and we want to hire for those skills. And I think HSI has a hiring right now where there are specific skills: cybersecurity, cyber investigations, anything cyber enabled, cyber related. It's going to be extremely important going forward, whether it's cryptocurrency investigations, whether it's finding network intrusions and determining the source of that. Those are really, really great skills to have, and it's the greatest job in the world. I mean, I was able to legitimately. I don't have a book, but I was able to do things that people have only read about in books or seen in movies. And
You
and
might
with
want to consider writing a book. Seriously.
um, but I mean, the world is open to you. It's as much or as little as you want to do. And I've seen the guys who've done little, and the women that have done little, but most of the people that I surrounded myself did the other extreme. They did the more, and they traveled and they took their investigations in different areas and didn't stop. They peeled back the layers of the onion and they kept going until they found everybody that was involved. But it's as much, again, as much or as little as you want to do. And if you want to do the traveling, the world is open to you. I think HSI and some of these other agencies, FBI, DEA, they're in multiple countries around the world. Um, we had in our agency, HSI, we had over 250 cities that we were represented in. So there's nowhere that you could go without finding an HSI agent. We were involved in every type of criminality, whether it was narcotics and money laundering, terrorism, intellectual property rights, child exploitation, human trafficking, you name it, we did it. I mean, I even sent somebody to the Gemological Institute of America to learn how to, look at gems and look at stones and make sure they were real.
Right.
Again, the world is open. So
So,
I think for me, um, and I'm not, we worked exclusively, I worked exclusively with local cops, county cops, state cops. I personally did a lot better by networking and being able to move around the country doing cases that impacted a larger level than you know a driving around a town and just doing a patrol. It wasn't for me. I couldn't, even with the NOAA position, we did things that were different outside the box of the normal regulatory scheme. So I couldn't, I was kind of tough with looking at things in a smaller level. I liked the larger scope investigations.
yeah, that's a great way to put it. I agree with everything you said there. And local patrol, some people, that's their thing. That's what they were meant for, and that's what local patrol was meant for them. Others, it is not. So those are great words of advice for anybody out there thinking about dipping their toe in the law enforcement world. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
How about you're retired now?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, retired from HSI. How about, is there anything you'd like to share about that? Like, what are you doing since leaving government service, or what are you up to?
So I retired. I spent about 30 to 45 days with doing nothing. And then I took a position I work for a company called the Anzalotti Group. And Rob Anzalotti is my boss, the owner of the company, but he has a contract with a local university where I'm the director of security. And Monday through Friday, weekends, I'm on kind of on call. I get calls if there's any issues, but I oversee all the security operations for the local university. We have several campuses, smaller school, about 3,000 students, but I get to interact with kids. We get to make policies. I get to still meet with the police departments in the area, coordinate. We do exercises. We work on different plans. I have the cops come through, the SWAT teams, to make sure they know the schools look like. So we're forward thinking. We want to make sure that we're proactive and they know everything about our campus before God forbid anything happens. But we stay ahead of the curve, so they know what's there, what the rooms look like, what the layouts are like, and we keep a really good dialogue. And we're some of those guys I'm actually friendly with as well from my HSI time, so it
Oh,
works
that's
out.
good.
And then I decided that that wasn't as fulfilling as I needed, so I decided to run for the New Jersey General Assembly in District 36. So I have a primary
Wow.
coming up June 10th.
Really?
Yeah.
Is there anything more you want to share about that? Like, what are your what motivated you to do that? What is your interest there? And
Well, my interest is in it right now. I think New Jersey is in a tough spot. Our taxes are, we have the highest property tax, the highest income tax, and the highest business taxes across the country. Our property taxes are averaging around $11,000 a year in New Jersey. Our income tax rates and our
mm,
property or business tax rates are the highest in the country. So we're losing businesses, we're losing families to other states. Um, we have a sanctuary policy where the police cannot work with ICE, which is a problem for me, just from my
yeah,
past experience and knowing that uh, crime will increase if we're not able to have that cooperation, the intelligence flow, the sharing of information to stop any of those issues. And if there is an issue, from gang days, that we can usually from the ICE side put an end to it if it's a foreign national, remove them even if there isn't a criminal violation. We can go in and stop that problem almost immediately by deporting them or removing them. And we also have a new tax that's going to go into effect this year. This summer is actually going to start June 1st. it's going to tax everything fun in New Jersey. If you look it up afterwards, it's kind of interesting. But fishing piers, batting cages, laser tag, skiing. There are so many different things that are out there that the government wants to tax. And then our utility bills are also going to go up June 1st by 20%. So
Wow.
I'm a Republican. We're more of a conservative, but I'm Republican, and we have a Democratic controlled state since about 2008, 2009. The Democrats have controlled everything, and money. Last year they spent 120 million on illegal aliens in the state of New Jersey. So, coming from my background, that's a problem.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're somebody that has the background to address these types of issues. Is there, at this point, do you have anywhere that if somebody were so inclined or interested to learn more about your platform and your plan, is there somewhere they could go to find that?
Yeah, so we're on all social media. I'm running with a lady named Diane DiBiase. She's a councilwoman from Carlstadt, New Jersey. And we have a website. It's Musto DiBiase, the number 4, NJAssembly36.com. And then we're on all the socials, Musto DiBiase.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, Musto DiBiase, the number 4, NJAssembly36.com.
All right. Well, good luck with that. I'm gonna check in with you and see how
all right.
it turns out.
Sounds good.
And maybe the next time you come back on, you'll have that book written.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I want to thank you again for taking the time to tell your law enforcement journey story. I appreciate that.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me transition to my listeners out there. And I just want to remind you to please continue to follow, like, share, and subscribe my social medias out there so that I can continue to bring you, top quality podcast guests like Chris to share their stories. So I would just encourage listeners to please do that. And again, one last time, Chris, thank you. And all my listeners, please stay safe out there. The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.